Privilege. And so we're going to continue that conversation we started 2 years ago. And we have a guest for today who will help with equipping and empowering us to navigate this. Our guest is a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University and president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. Okay. He did a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of the Western Cape and his teaching credentials at UNISA, then a master's degree at Cornell University and a PhD at Stanford University. He was a high school biology teacher in Vredenburg in District 6 and since then has been in university teaching and leadership around South Africa. He also leads a major project on behalf of the Minister of Higher Education that prepares promising young academics from the 26 public universities for the professorate. His research is broadly concerned with the politics of knowledge as laid out in his award-winning book, Knowledge in the Blood. In 2013, he was awarded the Lifetime Achiever Award of Africa at the Education Africa Global Awards in New York and the University of California's Spendlove Award for his contribution to tolerance, democracy, and human rights. In 2014, he won the NAEF L. Rodhan Prize from the British Academy for Social Sciences and Humanities for his book, Knowledge in the Blood. He was a fellow at the Center of Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University from 2016 to 2017. He currently serves as the president of both the South African Institute of Race Relations and South African Academy of Science. He also holds honorary doctorates from the universities of Edinburgh, Vermont, and Cleveland State University. Please, can we put our hands together for Professor Jonathan Jansen? Sheesh, Professor, that's impressive. Right up the step.
All of that will disappear if he tells you I'm a Blue Bulls fan. everything.
Oh! Okay, now we can talk prejudice. Professor,
yes.
Thank you for the second service. We will do this as it happens.
This crowd is more rowdy than the first.
Yeah, I know. So, Professor, we connected a while ago, and we did this interview. And for me, a big part of that was navigating my own white privilege. I got freaked out when people used the word white privilege. I'm like middle working class. I'm not racist. Don't blame me. Don't put it on me. And I remember in that interview, that was a major area we were pressing into because I was going, it's unfair. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm privileged. And secondly, don't blame me for the people that were racist. That was my fathers and their forefathers, not me. So I'm now having fingers pointed and I'm being put in a position of blame. So I want us to discuss that. You might be sitting here now going, well, you know, I'm not racist. So I said that too before that first conversation. And I'm like, I don't have a part here, but we need to sort it out for all those bad people out there that like have dodgy flags in their house and So I thought we were going to sort them out, but in fact I was sorted out because I began to develop a deeper consciousness of the prejudice that formed who I was. And I want to say today as we go into this engagement, the power of this moment as we experienced in the first service will not be with you reflecting on others, but on yourself. You may be in that position like me where you're going, well, this doesn't really apply to me, but let me listen objectively and intellectually for other people that are racists or have prejudice issues. Focus on you. And I pray that you would say, God, search my heart and help me become aware of areas in my own life where this is a real struggle. And so maybe before I go into white privilege, we can press into the first question. Because when we think of racism, we usually just think black and white, but apparently it's far deeper than that. Can you give us insight into this?
Sure. So, when the Dutch first came to South Africa in the 17th century, the first thing that struck them wasn't black people. The first thing that struck them was difference. And this is so true of our entire history, that our original sin wasn't racism. Our original sin was, how do we deal with difference? And to this very day, South Africans struggle, particularly people in churches, struggle with black and white, struggle with rich and poor, struggle with Muslims versus Christians, struggle with gay versus straight. In other words, difference is a big... Apartheid's logic, obviously, major logic was race.
Yeah.
But it was also about discriminating, as you know, historically against all these other groups. So we are a bunch of, as South Africans, we're a bunch of struggles, you know, around difference. Yeah. And some of them we deal with better than others. Most churches, for example, still struggle with gay people in the church and gay identity and want to straighten them out, if you forgive the metaphor. So yeah, and I just want to say that what is amazing about this church, because I go to a lot of churches to talk about stuff, different things. This is one of the very few churches in which the pastor and his team has the courage to put this on the table. Because the one thing I know about race and racism, you can't get through it without talking about it.
Wow.
And I want to really thank this church. You are unusual in many ways. You know, your jeans are too tight. You probably have tattoos that I don't know of, which means Becky Taylor won't recruit you into SAPS, and so on. But in every way, you are exceptional as a team, and I had the privilege in the break to meet with your team. And thank God for you guys, especially here in the Deep South, to put these things on the table. Yeah. And I appreciate all of you for being here to listen to this difficult, because it's hard. I don't talk about stuff that I'm embarrassed about. Yeah. And yet, in the Christian community especially, we have to. Yeah. So kudos.
And I think that's so vital for us as followers of Jesus. In the first interview as well, you brought something out we'll tap into. But we as God's people, if we're going to devote ourselves like the early church and somehow find each other on that common ground beyond our prejudice, it starts with conversations. It was that first conversation on Zoom when we couldn't be in person with you that started to change something in me. You didn't give me a list of 5 things I need to be a good Christian that doesn't carry prejudice. It started developing an awareness. Southside Church, we're committed to opening up and vulnerably speaking about these things with the pursuit of reconciling and reflecting the kingdom culture that Jesus wants reflected in his church on the earth. And so we're today, even in our conversation, not going to come up with 5 key points that fix our issues with other people. But we're opening this conversation, and we will continue to talk and meet each other and process as we go. One of the things, Professor, that's interesting is it's not racism, prejudice isn't black and white, like you said. It's our inability to embrace what's different, which does mean that racism and prejudice is not a skin issue, it's a sin issue. And if we're followers of Jesus, navigating a heart that's enthroned by Christ and not mastered by our sin is a very important part of what we do. And that means we need to embrace this. And these conversations should be happening as we become disciples of Jesus. And so let's go right to that white privilege thing, because that freaks me out. Okay. I'm like, I hear that, and then I'm tempted to say this in my whiteness. I wasn't privileged. Don't worry, no. I wasn't privileged just because I'm white. Stop blaming me.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that's very hard for white South Africans to understand. Obviously, it's also hard for the other country I know very well. It's hard for white Americans to understand that. That's why they're in uproar, under Trump. And the reason it's hard to understand is because it's true and because it hurts. And I often say to people, it's very difficult to educate people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s about white privilege when your entire gut, your entire wiring tells you you're not privileged. And then let's make it local. Unless you're blind, it is not an accident that there is an ocean view that is different from a Masipumalele, that is different from a Sun Valley. Yeah. Which means that if you have parents who live in Sun Valley and have 2 cars and a dog, and a credit card, that's not an accident. That happened because there were certain things that privileged you. So yes, you might not have lived as a young person under apartheid, but you benefit from it generationally, right? So, and the people in Masipumalele are much worse off, obviously, than the people in Ocean View who are also not doing well. And so, in every part of the country, I can point to an Alexandra and a Santon.
Yeah.
I can point where I live, to a Steenberg and a Kirstenhoff, et cetera, et cetera. So unless you're willfully blind and you can't see how privilege follows you, okay? Now, of course, as a white person, you might not have been wealthy, but there were certain things you could do, there were certain schools you could go to, there were certain jobs you could get that was not available.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. It is let me just make this personal. We lost housing on both sides of the family.
Sure.
My dad in Denver Road, Lansdowne, my mother in the middle of the town of Montague in the Boland,
Wow.
That to this day, two middle-class families, to this day, our family struggles, my brothers and sisters, because of the double dispossession.
Wow.
Okay, so the reason they suckle is because of this long, long shadow of history and so on. But so for me, part of it is educational.
Yeah.
But part of it is just not reachable. In other words, it's very hard to tell somebody who is so arrogant and so determined to say, my parents also worked hard. Well, every bloody parent worked hard.
Yeah.
Every black parent also worked hard.
Yeah.
But you worked on different tracks.
Wow.
One track that got you forward and another track that held
Wow.
you back. So when I speak to my students about this at Stellenbosch or the Free State or Pretoria, wherever I've worked, it takes a few weeks before it clicks. Because remember, if you're 19 years old, all your life you've been told a different story.
Yeah.
If you're privileged, and so on. So but in your case, and as in the case of many others, sometimes it takes an epiphany, something dramatic that happens, where the light shines on you and you say, oh my goodness, but I am privileged.
Yeah.
And then the next question, which we'll get to, I'm sure, is, now what do you do with it?
Yes. So like when I hear white privilege, I've always heard someone blaming me.
Yeah.
What is that actually saying, rather than blaming me?
Well, it's heard as blame. So I can't determine, of course, how you receive the message, right? But you're quite right. For many of our white brothers and sisters, what they hear is, I'm guilty. I'm to blame. And it's very hard for a young person, who's optimistic, who wants to move forward, and feeling this sense of blame. It's compounded by the fact that the current government, that is largely a black government, is messing up so gloriously. Okay, so now you feel you've got a reason to point the finger the other way. But we need to deal with these things in one basket. One, acknowledging, and I'll come to that in a minute, a government that I just think has sold us out. And on the other hand, my personal responsibility within it. Okay?
Okay, so just stay there for a second. So what you're saying is, when we hear white privilege, it's not pointing a finger at me and going, you're to blame. It's saying you have a responsibility because of the privilege.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to gain by pointing the finger at somebody and saying, you're white privilege, ha, 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 deal with it. That, for me, is, first of all, unchristian. Secondly, it's just unhelpful, right? And as I said in the earlier service, I'm also now privileged. So I don't see myself as a victim of the past. I see myself as having had the privilege of studying at good places, of being, so the fact that I grew up in Steenberg and Retreat happened, I acknowledge that. But now God has blessed me with a privilege. What do I do with it? I'll give you a few examples.
So that is, when we have privilege, it's actually a blessing with which we are responsible to do something.
It's a platform.
So the white privilege actually doesn't have to put us in a position of feeling guilty, like, oh, I'm white and I have nice stuff. It's actually going, wow, God, you've empowered me with privilege, and now I've got a responsibility to use that. And of course, it's using it in the journey of reconciling.
Yeah. And so how do you use that privilege, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of my comrades, a lot of very close friends of the family are white South Africans. And what we sit down and do, I can give you examples of this, as we sort of say, now what do we do with our respective privileges? Do we, first of all, use it to serve all our people? Or do we use it to only serve some people? Now this is very crucial, because for me as a black person, it's quite easy to sort of say, so the Future Professors program that you mentioned, the minister said to me very clearly, the current one, we only want black South Africans in the Future Professors program. I said, then take it. I don't want to do it. There will be white South Africans. Wow. There will be foreign nationals from other African countries. In other words, my faith and my politics say that unless it is inclusive, unless I use this privilege of teaching other people how to become a professor, if I don't include everyone, my bursary scheme as a university vice chancellor, it would be easy just to give it to black people, but that makes me mean-spirited. That makes me, that doesn't make me a Christian, for one.
Yeah.
And so I look for poor kids who are white. I look for Zimbabweans who will never get any bursary funding in South Africa. And obviously the majority, just by virtue of demographics, are black South Africans.
Yeah.
But you have to use your privilege to teach, and to teach inclusion rather than exclusion.
So how does that translate into my life as a white South African? So I'm sitting here now, you're going, whoa, okay, I need to rethink how I harness my privilege, because usually I harness my privilege to buy nice gifts for all my white friends. So I'll go, and Christmas time I'll buy a bottle of like expensive perfume. That's like, so how do I translate that? If I'm going now, I recognize privilege, and I actually recognize the blessing of responsibility God's given me to use that in reconciliation, not just to continue living in the light of my luxurious life in comparison to many others. How do I begin doing that?
Well, you know, let's start with this group of people here, okay? So one of the things that really touched me the first time I came to your church a couple of years ago is that the people in this church, by virtue of their diversity, didn't land here by accident. You must have done with your team, with your leadership team, you must have thought about how do we create a real church as opposed to, you know, I said to my friends, I'll never be invited back to the Dutch Reformed Church. I said to them, how on earth can you have, did you know they still have 4 churches?
Sure.
Die Moederkerk, you know, for white people. Die Sendingkerk for colored people.
Wow.
There is a Africa church for black Africans, and then, I don't know where they got these people, there's an Indian church for Dutch church, you know. And I said to them, can you imagine you're going to get to heaven one day and there's a mansion, you know, John 14, there's a mansion for white people, there's a mansion for colored. I said, you know. And so just by virtue of bringing together people, you are using your privilege as a pastor, as a leader. But yes, part 2 of that problem. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I love you very much, but I don't know how to lie. Did you notice, and I counted, I deliberately sat at the back. They didn't want me to sit at the back, but I deliberately sat at the back. Did you know that 73% of you are sitting next to somebody who looks like you?
Sure.
Now, you didn't plan that. You didn't come in and sort of say, let me find another colored person, right? But it's because it's become so natural.
Wow.
It's become so natural. I say to my students, they say, no, we're not racist. We're the new generation, post-Mandela. I said, look at you. There's 280 of you. You're sitting next to somebody that looks like you. And then they try to move their seats, you know, while I'm speaking. And so the first step is, of course, to deracialize community. That's the power you have as a pastor, that I have as a professor.
Wow.
The second step is, how do you create genuine conversations amongst us? Because you can be together in church and be separate in the mall.
Yeah.
Do I hear an amen?
Yeah. Guys, I promise I don't hide when I see you. Please, if you've ever taken offense. So like I go home and I'm like, sure, okay, I have to be intentional with my privilege. And I need to engage with people and have genuine conversation with people that aren't like me. Now I'm sitting and I've just got like my friends that I've always had, but suddenly I'm having this revelation, oh sure, I need to be intentional about this. I'm raising my kids and I'm teaching them the same thing I know, hang out with the people which are like you. How can we in our personal lives practically begin to break that default way of working so we heal internally and reconcile in a healthy way?
So these things are habitual, right? So my wife and I decided when our children were born in another country, that from day one, they would wake up and see in our home people from every possible faith, from every variations of color, from every gay and straight and so foreign national. They grew up normally. So by the time they went to South African schools, they were in shock because what they saw was not what was. And by the way, let me just say this to you as young parents and parents to be. As somebody who's taught both in senior high school and in first year in university, you can put this in the bank. Oh, by the way, talking about the bank, I thought to myself, I'm not going to give money to a church, this morning, because I give most of my money away anyway to other causes. And I made the big mistake of asking the lady at the back there, because I have no money with cash with me, how does one pay? A snap scan. You must be the first church that has a snap scan, So she was watching me, and so I was forced to do a gift on snap scan, Oh, my daughter's going to enjoy that one, But let me just tell you in all seriousness, as parents and as future parents, and you can put this in the bank, I can predict whether your kid is going to have problems with race based simply on who comes over to the braai on a Friday night at your home. I can predict it.
Wow.
That's how you get Tiens de Toy at the University of Stellenbosch, who urinated the other day on other people. That's how you get my colleagues in sports science writing about colored women. These 5 white women writing about colored women in a journal of all things.
Wow.
Unhygienic habits and intelligence deficits. That's how you get it. And by the way, let me also say this about using your privilege.
Yeah.
Don't just use your privilege downwards. Don't just think that I'm using my privilege because I'm going into Masiphumelele. And by downwards, I mean thinking the less privilege. Also use your privilege sideways.
Wow. So I'm sitting here now and I'm going, oh, flip. My kid's on a downward spiral at the moment. And I'm the pastor, if that's the truth. Like, how much diversity do I have in my personal life and my personal world with friends? And we were talking about this earlier because I'm like that. I live in a neighborhood that's predominantly middle working class. That's what I know. My kids play with their kids. And I'm going, whoa, God, I want to live a life of depth beyond just what I know. So I go, okay, well, God, if I walk across the road, I'm going to see someone like me. If I drive around the corner, I'm going to see someone like me. And this is where, as the church, we need to recognize the significance of this. Because we engage with one another here and with community that's far bigger than the community we live in. What a beautiful platform on which we could pursue intentional relationships with people that are not like us, in an attempt to heal, reconcile, and understand and learn and grow from others. From here, we could eat. I know people here that I could invite for a meal, build friendships with, that have a story to tell, that are different from me, that aren't as easily connected. I don't have the same connectedness with in my immediate space. What would be your recommendations for ways we could step out beyond ourselves practically and begin engaging and processing with intention a family life which gives a legacy to our children in which we are not living blinded by that privilege?
Now, the wonderful thing about living, and particularly living in South Africa, is that there are so many different spaces in which you can put yourself, in which you will learn in diverse communities from different people. Sometimes that's highly organized, such as in rugby. So take rugby, for example. I remember sitting at Loftus when I worked at the University of Pretoria, and I was literally one of a few black people in that stand, and I would hear the comments at the beginning about Brian Abana and the Ndungane twins, right? Now nobody makes a mockery of those people because you have a Cheslin Colby, because you have, you know, these amazing players, and so on. But that structure of rugby, if you listen to Rassi's reflections in that video on the team that won the World Cup, created a space in which, as equals, you were struggling for the same thing.
Wow.
In your school, in your volleyball team, in your business practice, I have suggested to you half an hour ago, how about we put together, I'm going to put it together, 20 people around the room about how to fix South Africa. The first thing will be a talk by Andre de Ruyter, and we're going to engage him. Now, the people I choose, you might think it's automatic. I carefully think about how do I create a team across the board, black and white, rich and poor, so that we solve problems together. You with me? Yeah. So in everything you do, be deliberative. Now, to me, it's now a natural thing. I don't think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Until it becomes a habit. So I left Cape Town in 1985 to study abroad, and then since then I've worked in South Africa. The first time I come back to Cape Town, a couple of years ago. Do you know that every family function is just bloody colored people? Everywhere I go, you know, you go into Casey and you sort of say, this is a Bantu square. You know, so everywhere you go, the people look the same, talk the same, swear the same, you know. And I'm saying to myself, the Western Cape hasn't changed fundamentally, you know. Wow. And then I come in here this morning and I sort of say, thank God there's a bit of an oasis in the wilderness. But we're so used to just hanging out with people who look like us, pray like us, you know, make love like us and so on, that you begin to think that's normal. Let me just tell you something. It's not normal.
Sure.
And it's not Christian.
But that's a very powerful thing. So literally you're saying, this is what I'm taking out of this. Okay, I'm a follower of Jesus. Prejudice and racism is a sin issue, not a skin issue, which means it should be a big deal to me as a follower of Jesus. Then you're telling me, well, if you come from privilege, it's not about blaming you, but you have this gift, a responsibility given to you. Then I read the word of God, love your neighbor as yourself, you know, live a generous life. They will know you by your fruit. So clearly this is part of God's will for every one of his followers, that they live lives that reflect reconciliation. And then you're telling me, oh no, don't get all like weird now and go and pray for 2 hours to figure out what you should do. Begin to develop the disciplines of engaging with people that are different to you. Begin stepping into their space and make a decision. And you used the word discipline. Disciplines start with a sense that sometimes we're making a decision rather than following a feeling. My feelings always default to what's most comfortable, someone that gets me, you know, it's same world. Oh, frustrated because Netflix is buffering. You know what I mean? For me to, so it's about, there is intention. So here's a question. People go, well, we need to do that and be intentional, so they just window dress. So, okay, we need 5 black people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, come and let's be friends now because I have to do that because I'm Christian, they said in my church. How do we make our engagement with people that is different by decision meaningful and not just this kind of superficial act of trying to do the right thing?
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of us do window dressing, it's true. Look, I think the question we often ask our students, that I often ask our students, do people change their beliefs first and their behavior later? Or their behavior first and their beliefs later? It turns out that most of us only change our beliefs later. That is, by getting involved. You know, so I went to, as I said this morning, I went to the University of Pretoria, very arrogant. I'm the first black dean there of education. I've got 7,500 students. What do I do with them? I'm going to sort them out until, by working with them every day, visiting their homes, visiting their farms, visiting their churches, of all things, And then I realized that these weren't other people's children, these were my children.
Wow.
Then my own hatred, my own bigotry, my own indifference was massively impacted because I fell in love with these young people.
Wow.
And sometimes it takes an epiphany like that for God to speak to you in the process of doing.
Wow.
So my beliefs were backward.
Wow.
Because of all the pain and the hurt. But by being involved, I come to an understanding of myself and others.
Wow.
That is more generous, that is more forgiving. And that is why by the time I get to the Free State, it's easy for me to understand that, yes, these 4 boys who committed that terrible act had to be punished.
Wow.
But then what? And it's in the Christian ethic, okay, to bring them back.
Wow.
I remember a woman from the Human Rights Commission sitting there, very arrogant, sort of saying.
So you were the principal of the
I
Free
was the
State
Vice Chancellor.
during this, I remember.
Yes.
And they were making the domestic workers run on the field
And drink urine and so on in the
Okay,
food.
so you had to manage that.
I wasn't
at the
there at
university.
the time.
Okay.
I was brought in because of it.
Okay.
And so I look at the situation, I study it for 3 months, and I said, wait a minute, this is not an individual problem. This is not individual pathology. This is also an institutional problem because they gave an award for this video.
Wow.
Right? And so I said to myself, of course, there's personal responsibility. They're not kids. But what do you do next? And what we did next was to invite them to make things right. That's fundamental to the Gospels.
Wow.
Okay? And on a Friday night, after a year of working towards reconciliation, the 5 workers, black workers, sat on the one side of the table, and these 4 boys on the other. And Dani Grobler from Namibia, he was the only one who could speak English. He starts off in English and says to these workers, and then switches to Afrikaans and says, "Sal julle ons asseblief vergewe? Will you please forgive us?" And he was still talking, and then one of the black women stood up, because they knew each other, and said to him, not in her language, Sesotho, but in Afrikaans, he says to him, "Maar natuurlik, julle is ons kinders, but of course, you are children." I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, you know. It's in the process of doing that hard work.
Wow.
That, and you know, I hired Dani, I don't know if I told you this, I hired Dani in our marketing department. I said, you are going to sell the university and put it at Chapa. You know, he's never been in a township in his life, you know. He was my best marketer. Yeah. And so the Christian faith is not about throwing people away. It's about acknowledging wrongdoing.
Wow.
And bringing people back.
Wow.
And that is our gift.
And our responsibility is to act sometimes before our hearts catch up with what we're doing with our hands. So Jesus says in his word, he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Sometimes the hand moves before the heart gets there. And this is what you were saying, going
Correct.
to that university, and you were doing the job, but your heart was not for these, and it was in doing. So for us, even on this journey personally, it might mean intentionally engaging and stepping into a space that's uncomfortable, engaging and developing relationship with someone where it still doesn't sit easily, but then eventually looking back and saying, oh my word, my heart has caught up with the discipline of my hands in pursuing reconciliation. And so there is a high level of intention that has to develop in us, and a conviction that continues making us become aware and conscious of our prejudice.
Yes, and that this morning you used a beautiful word, vulnerability. That making yourself vulnerable means that you're able to learn. Okay? and when you do that, you'll be quite amazed at how things that were normally just words become very powerful.
Yeah.
So this song, for example, has, which I used to enjoy singing, well, I can't sing, but playing. And then I realized, and I started to play this at funerals, because I actually realized that this was what I was trying to do before there were words, you know, it was just the practice. Where's that brother?
I don't know what Professor's doing. I just work here. I trust him.
Is your thing on?
Oh, there we go. Do we have sound? Yo, Professor. He's not just got a bajillion doctorates. If you know it, sing it. Come on, some of you. Let's hear you sing. None of you can sing it. Yo. Wow.
And so here's a song that Mahalia Jackson made famous that, if I can just help somebody.
Wow.
As I walk along, then my living will not be in vain. But you see, that didn't mean much until I got down and started to learn from my students, particularly my white students, and learned how to be more fully human, and in the process, what it means to be a Christian. Yeah. So I stopped going to church. You might be the reason I come back to church.
Come on, Prof.
But I used to go to church 18 times a week in the Brethren. I counted once all the services I went to, all the pre and post things. And then I said, I don't want to go to church anymore. I want to start doing church in my life.
Yeah.
So every day, every weekend, every hour, I try to teach not by words, but by doing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you will quote the book of Hebrews to me that,
we should be
together, etc., etc. But yeah, so that song, every time I hear it, every time I play it, it's got a different meaning now because it is a very profound statement about what it means to be a Christian in the way you live.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, even now, I'm feeling like this higher level of responsibility in my personal life for navigating and becoming that person that is like Jesus, bridging the barrier between the worst sinner, the person that doesn't look the same as me. And I understand the responsibility, and I need to act upon this. But then we also, other than people living with privilege, we have those that were victims of privilege. We talk about the tension of someone with privilege often feeling blamed and responding, not recognizing it's about celebrating the gift of responsibility God's given them to sow into the lives of others. What are some of the dynamics the victim struggles with on the other side of that privilege?
Yeah, look, we have real victims. We have people who lost children, who lost lives, who lost opportunities. The Mamelodi mothers, for example,
Sure.
in the Craddock 4. there's huge, the people who've been dislocated, there's real victimhood. Okay, so we must never underplay that.
Yeah.
The question is, what do you do with it? Do you go through your life bitter? Do you go through your life angry? I was there. Or do you say, how do I turn that to my advantage? How do I turn that? Because the best way to deal with bereavement, to deal with, is to go and comfort others. We know that. So I often say to particularly the black middle classes, people who look like me, who are very, very angry as they think about the past, I said, where does that get you? Nowhere, right? So what do we do with this? And so I'm very aware of the fact that I am now privileged. I've been blessed. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
And so on. And so every day I try to figure out what to do, but also what to do differently. You see, if you simply do what everybody else does and runs a soup, I love the soup example, don't get me wrong. A soup kitchen, that's great. If you do it massively like that, that is amazing. But what if you did something that nobody expects?
Yeah.
Give you an example. There's a promenade in Durban. Those of you who know Durban would know there's that long, walkway along the bay there. One day I saw something that I'll never forget. There was a white hobo sitting on the ground with a condensed milk tin. It was yesterday. Then came two black street children, and they put their cents in his money. I thought it was wait a minute. Did you guys not read your history textbooks? When Mandela walks onto the field with the number 6 journey of Francois Pienaar, that goes against the logic of victimhood, right? And I can give you those stories over and over and over again. Do something exceptional. I say to my kids every day, do something that nobody else has done before, right? I went into Manenberg the other day because The Voice, which as you know is one of our elite newspapers, and The Voice had a story of a girl, Naila, who is studying with Montessori to become a teacher, but she doesn't have a laptop. So I saw this, one of my former students in Bloemfontein sent me the story. So I called, there was a number, and so I called Naila, and I said to her, do you have a laptop yet? Anyway, I said, you're going to get one today. So by the time I got to her in Manenberg, in a very depressed part of Manenberg, somebody had given her a laptop, but nobody talked about a router, nobody talked about data. So I said, jump in the car, you and your baby and your brother, and I took them to Canal Walk. She said, what is this place? I said, it's called Canal Walk, but my family calls it Canala Walk. And they had never been there, and I said, here's P&A, or whatever it's called. Here's a trolley, go and fill up this trolley, and whatever stationery you need for the rest of the year. Why does one do that? Okay? There's a whole lot of things going on in my head. One is I'm using my privilege. Secondly, I'm acutely aware of the fact that when I got there, she was praying. She's a Muslim. It is Eid. She's praying. I'm acutely aware of the fact that this is going to have, they don't know me from a bar soap, right? Yeah. That this is a messaging system of inclusion and embrace. Etc. So I have to use my privilege. By the way, I've got bad news for all of you guys. I discovered this late in life, but I'm just going to put it out there. This is really bad. I don't have any investments. I don't have any, when my bank manager calls, I just pretend I don't see the funding. I discovered, this is going to be very traumatizing for you, that when you die, you can't take anything with you. This is horrible. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. So give it away. Give it away. And I can see some finance people here saying, you made a huge mistake inviting this man, but anyway.
You can come to the finance course. It well balanced.
And it is indeed more blessed to give than to receive.
So we have someone that's known privilege, this responsibility. I just think of that eccentric generosity like you're speaking about, which is part of what we need to do with each other. And then we speak about the need for those that have been the victims of this to process and pursue forgiveness. And you did actually now speak about some of the personal steps you've taken in now living this out. In terms of dealing with your own prejudice, and you also actually touched on this with the university, what practical steps do you take in your own mind dealing with your prejudice that we can maybe learn from?
So when I speak at schools, for example, which I do a lot of, or universities, spoke at Wet Pups, Herschel, these schools, bishops the other day, I start off by acknowledging, because you see, if you talk to white people about racism, it's very hard if you start with them. So I start with myself. And I tell the story that I shared with you. I talked about my own journey and so on. And then it's easier for people. By the way, pedagogically, this works in almost any... I work with Dylan Ray and the late Roy Hallenberg. We never start with apartheid when we talk to schools about change. We start with Nazi Germany. You start with something far away. And then you back into something that's more familiar. And I find that that's very effective in talking to people because it takes away this notion that you're on the platform, you're good, you've arrived, and you're pointing the finger. And so I think it is very important to talk, clever people in sociology talk about complicity. We are all complicit. None of us have clean hands, you know. And how do we then talk through that and facilitate? Now, you actually, I don't know what your training is apart from being a pastor, but you tick all the boxes. I might just give you an honorary degree, you know. You tick all the boxes in terms of how do you facilitate. This is a difficult dialogue. Most churches freak out, you know. But you have been able to facilitate it in a way by speaking about yourself. You did exactly what, you know, and then making people feel we can have this conversation. Because the goal is not to blame you. The goal is to build this country in a way that is better than what we received.
So we do need to land, but I've got about 3 more questions. So now I'm sitting here, or we're sitting here in the congregation. We're like, "Whoa, yes, God, we're gonna be reconciled people." Now, like, I go outside and I meet someone that's not like me, and I go, "Molo, booty." Like, what do I do? So give me a practical, like, step. No, because we don't. We're like, well, I'll go and be all Christian. "Hey, my brother, my name's Grant," and then it can be like very like forced. So literally, what are some of the best ways for me to approach someone different to me and begin a healthy journey together of getting to know one another? Do we, you know what I mean? You don't want to be too forward. A little bit like when you're communicating. You don't start with a part that I say to them, "Hey, come to my house and I'll bless you with." How can we approach each other and be true to ourselves, but also meaningfully begin a journey of growing in a relationship with one another?
So most importantly, keep it real.
Okay.
Just keep it down to earth.
So when you say that, do you mean like be honest with each other?
Being honest with each other and just sort of saying, listen, but the first thing I would do, I would sit here in church and I'd go home and I'd sort of say, that was a very challenging message from the pastor and that overweight black guy. Right. Let me do some housekeeping first. And these are the questions I would have with myself.
Wow. Take these down if you want.
Do I have a different set of cutlery, plate and saucers for the domestic than for my friends? Do I hear an ouch? Do I know this? My children know the surname of the gardener and where he lives? Or is this just Jack? Right? Do I pay above the minimum wage? Okay. In order to make sure that this person is comfortable? Have I had a meal in their home in Khayelitsha, Langa, or Manenberg? You see, those are the things that matter. So before you do something, think something. Before you go out there, go in here.
Wow.
Okay? And have an accounting system.
Wow.
With yourself. Okay, and then begin to say, now what do I do now? Again, particularly for those of you who are middle class like me and privileged, don't just think of giving things downwards, right? I mean, I said to my family years ago, you will never give second-hand clothing to the people who work with us or work for us. You will buy them the exact same clothing that you got for our own children, okay?
That's a change in thinking.
Okay? It's absolute nonsense. It's disrespectful.
Wow.
Okay. And so on. So, and then just get into doing. Now, again, I watch you and Desmond. Desmond is a very famous, in South Africa, in the Western Cape, a very famous dentist, right? It is hard for you to talk down to him. In fact, you shared with me that he would tell you, you're not doing well enough, we're not doing well enough in this aspect of our transformation. Now, that is not a conversation you're going to have with an old man in Masupumalele who has no education. So it's uncomfortable for white folk. You know, I see with my students, they really suckle. The conservative white students from Witwatersrand, they see me as a black professor, they sort of say, my parents didn't tell me about this, you know. How come he knows more than me? How come he reads more than me, you know? And then he gives me 0 for my first assignment. I mean, that's hard for a white dude, right? And that's what, you know, the psychologists call cognitive dissonance, because you're now faced with a reality you weren't taught.
Wow.
So don't just give down. Give sideways. Open your heart to people who are better than you, who are smarter than you, who might, the normal things, earn more than you if necessary. But put yourself in situations in which you can learn. This is the most important thing. I am still learning, and I hope to continue learning just by being with people in difficult situations who challenge me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's your grandchildren. My granddaughter is 4, came on the Sunday morning Zoom in New Zealand, and my wife said, I've got to go to church, and she could see I was still in my pajamas, and she said to me on the Zoom, Papa, why don't you go to church? Man, that hurt. That hurt at a very deep level, right?
You go, girl.
but it hurts because she observes, and speaks it. But I can only take it on board if I'm open to learning.
Yeah.
And that's true for all of us, obviously.
And I think that's who we want to be as a church. Learners. We don't cut off and get defensive with racial issues and go, I disagree and have an opinion. Bigger your opinion, the smaller your world. But aside from that, we want to be learners. And learners allow both sides open. They're never fighting for an opinion. It's, God, what can you show us about ourselves? Something else interesting that you're saying, Professor, is it actually starts going home and reflecting on yourself and your own life. I'm sitting in this and going, how many friends of color do I have that are close friends in my family world? So that is a spiritual journey, and that is part of the transformational journey with Jesus. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Begin to think differently. And thinking isn't a feeling. And so it is that changing the way we think, reflecting, and then going on the lifelong transformational journey of becoming like Jesus and offending the Pharisees by hanging out with the prostitute and not having to try to convince her that she was a sinner. The kindness of Christ that leads people to repentance and kindness to others that are not like us. We must land. Last question. You've, of course, worked with communities in different spaces where you've seen moments, miraculous moments where true transformation has taken place and communities reconciled. Share an example of that and what it smells like and sounds like. And
yeah, you're right. There's so many examples. I just want to perhaps close with the one that fundamentally changed me, and that was a poor white Afrikaans speaking man from Pretoria West. That's, those of you who know Pretoria would know that's part of Atteridgeville. So there's a little white community there. And he came after hours when everybody had left to see me as the dean. And so he comes into this fancy office and with his daughter, and you could see she's all dressed up and the hare is teruggekam, and she's looking like a promising first-year student. And he then says to me, in Afrikaans of course, he says to me, look, we don't have much, and can you please give my daughter a bursary to study, to become a teacher? And the first thing I noticed was that his shoelaces were different colors. And so I knew this guy is just getting by. And in looking down, in a flash, it's very hard to explain this to people because, I'm a man of science. I don't believe in all these, But that truly was a moment because in a flash, I didn't see a white man. I saw my dad.
Wow.
When I asked him years ago, at the age of 17, I said, Dad, I would like to go to university to study. My dad drove a laundry for Nanusi dry cleaners. And he cried. He didn't cry often. He cried and he said, my boy, I just don't have the money. In that moment, I did not see a white man. I saw my dad. And in that moment, I didn't see a white girl. I saw myself.
Wow.
And since that day, thank God for that, I just had a different understanding of myself and others. This was not the historic enemy. This is my family. This is my people. I have a duty to serve them as I serve anybody else. And that had such a... And I don't... there's other examples I could use, but I don't believe that was simply a human intervention. I don't believe that. I really do believe that was the divine. And I'm very grateful for that.
Wow. The work of the Holy Spirit giving you a revelation beyond the color of a man's skin, all the prejudice and the pain you had experienced. Imagine if God could do that in each one of us. Imagine if we could embrace the devotion of reconciling with people and accepting our own prejudice, bringing it before God, choosing to literally discipline ourselves into engaging meaningfully with others that were not like us. This could be, and I pray that this becomes our story in the deep south of Cape Town, South Africa. And I want to trust God that He would do something significant in our hearts, because as you say, Professor, it starts with our own hearts and minds. And there's the work of the Holy Spirit that creates a revelation of the fact that every individual on the face of the planet was worth the price tag of the life of Jesus Christ. And we are equal in every way under the shadow of the cross. I want to ask our elders to come up. I want to ask you if you would stand with me. And I want us to pray. And as we reflect on today's conversation, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. The first one is, who are you becoming as an individual? Who am I becoming? Am I becoming an individual with a heart soft enough to acknowledge that I need to navigate prejudice? Am I becoming more open and courageous to taking risks in order to face my prejudice and build relationship that is meaningful with those that aren't like me? Who are you becoming as an individual? And connected to that is the fact that we are the church. And so who are we becoming as a community? Are we becoming like the early church that sold what they had and gave to everyone in need, finding common ground, looking at each other equally, celebrating diversity, and showing a counterculture to the world that left others calling them peculiar people? Who are we becoming?